Hello and welcome to The Stack. This week, the collab that we've all been waiting for. The Stack and the Menu get together. We look at the boom in food magazines. Plus, we speak with the editor-in-chief of a title dedicated to breakfasts and Monocle's new book about Dubai. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. A pleasure to start the show with Steve Pill in the studio. Steve is Monocle's Global Partnerships Managing Editor. He's here to talk about the Monocle 100 Dubai, which was published this week. Our 200-page guide is an upbeat exploration of Dubai's best retail, cultural, and culinary offerings, as well as the essential services and neighborhoods to call home in partnership with the Dubai Department of Economy and Tourism. Here is Steve with more.
The global partnerships are all of our commercial partnerships here at Monocle. So what this means in practice is that when a brand or a government comes to us and they want to partner with Monocle and make the most of the amazing audience that we have, they come to us with some ideas of how they want to communicate and what they want to communicate. And it's my job then to look after the creative side of those partnerships, working with the amazing design teams that we got here, with all of the editors, the correspondents we've got around the world. And we pull them in to make sure that we've got experts who can tell these stories really well, that we've got people on the ground who can go and see these places, and that we can really make sure that the commercial work that we do, whether that's a white label book or whether that's the advertorials that you read in the magazines every month, you can make sure that they're still the same quality and still from the same team that you would get when you're reading the rest of the magazine. So it's really fun. It's nice to have these briefs that they come to you with. They send you off to weird and wonderful places. They ask you to write about things that you've never thought about in that way before. So no 2 days is the same, and I like it that way.
And I have to say, you became a little bit of a Dubai expert, undeniably, to make this beautiful book, The Monocle 100, Tips, Ideas, and Recommendations for a Better Quality of Life in Dubai. But what I find it quite interesting, it's a little bit more than just a travel guide. It talks about people that actually moved there and how are their lives as well. Of course, you have tips where to have the best meal of your life and this kind of stuff. But it's more than just a travel book, right?
It absolutely is. It was the Dubai Department of Economy and Tourism who came to us, and they had a very, very simple brief for this one. They wanted us to showcase the livability of Dubai. It's very rare that you get just a one-word brief, but that was really what they wanted their focus to be. So when we sat down and we really thought about this, we thought, this is not just about, like you said, showing the restaurants and the culture and the things there, but it's about making a case for why this is a city that you should consider if you want to start afresh, if you want to start a business, start a family, expand a business, or just go there and, make the most of quite a welcoming and open environment for creative ideas. And so this livability brief was a really interesting one for us. I hope we've done a good job with it.
And I think about Dubai, like it or not, it is a buzzy place. It is a happening place. It is international. Some people say, I don't know about your experience, that it feels perhaps what some other cities were in the 90s, like, London, New York, and all those major cities as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been there in the last couple of years, so I can't compare it to what it was. But I certainly knew people who moved there for work in the early 2000s. And even speaking to them about the changes there, I do feel like the city's moved on. And, you have to put it into context that the UAE was only founded in 1971. It's a very new country. And so the cities, especially Abu Dhabi and Dubai, have grown so rapidly, and they're dealing with that in a very different and interesting way. And I think you're right. I think you touched on it. But, there is a little bit of maybe a stigma from some people that haven't been there. And I was fully aware of that before I went. And I think one of the things that we really wanted to tackle with this was to show a surprising side, really, show what's there and almost make a case to people that, it's a great city with a lot going on and more similarities than you might expect from other cities around the world.
Very interesting. Of course, it's the Monocle 100, so there's plenty in there. But I wonder, I might put you on the spot, if there is a nice restaurant, hotel, or an interesting person you spoke that maybe you want to mention, a little preview of the guide. I know there's so many things, but...
There are so many things. We found really great hospitality wherever we went. And I think one of the things I wanted to show with this guide was to, most people's idea of Dubai is of malls and of skyscrapers. And one of the things that I was keen to prove was that there's more to it than just that. And so actually some of the places that I really loved and found more surprising were those that were away from that. I have to give a nod to Soul Kitchen, which I think is a fantastic place. They showed some great hospitality while we were there, and it's actually run by a creative studio from Lebanon who are expanding into Dubai, and they put on big nights in Beirut, and now they're bringing that same kind of culture to Dubai. And so there's a fantastic cocktail bar with this incredible moving sculpture behind it that they designed themselves. It's all about migrating birds, and it's kind of speaking a little bit to their own move from Beirut to Dubai. And then there's a fantastic restaurant there, really light touch service. It was really a really enjoyable space to spend some time. But then there's also a DJ in the corner, and that any minute they're going to move the tables out the way and the place is going to turn into something else entirely, and the dancing starts. So, that was something where it felt really organic. It felt really natural. And that was just one of countless places that I saw there. I could carry on. I don't want to spoil too much of the guide and give away all 100 of them. But, that was certainly one of the favorites.
And the good thing that this project is also available for people to buy it. And I know it's going to be available at Frame at the Dubai Design District until the 30th of November. But people can actually buy on monocle.com, right?
Absolutely. And I really hope they will do. And just to explain to people, we've set it up as there are 100 entries in there. And for each of them, we visited a different place or we spoke to a different person. And we've kind of moved through the book from starting with some people who have relocated there or have spent their entire lives there, giving us the reasons as to why Dubai is an interesting place and has that kind of sense of opportunity. But from there, we move through to looking at services. So if you're working there, what are the kind of things that you really want? Can you get a good dry cleaners? Can you get a good taxi service? These kind of things that I felt like, if I was moving there, I would want to know that these things are on hand. And there's some fantastic examples of things that we've done there. Then obviously restaurants and culture and health and wellness. And then right at the end, if we have done a good job on convincing you of some of the benefits, at the very end, we look at 8 different neighborhoods. So maybe places where you might be able to find your own little corner. And we've spoken to some people who live there and shown around a few of the developments that, getting to see those architecturally really interesting, again, away from the high-rise buildings and something that feels more like a recognizable home to anyone who's going there from New York or London or elsewhere.
Thank you, Steve. And Monocle 100 Dubai is available to buy at Monocle's online shop, as well as our November retail pop-up at the Frame shop in Dubai Design District. And now, how exciting, The Stack and the Menu are collaborating this week to talk about the boom in food magazines. I had a lovely conversation with the host of The Menu, Chiara Rimella, about some of my favorite food titles and why they tend to do so well at the newsstand. First of all, I have to say that, doing The Stack, Chiara, every week there's a new food magazine. I think it's the most popular kind of magazine, and I think because you can do so much with it. We're going to discuss a bit more. It's not just kind of recipes. You can do, travel. You can even politics. We just had a big election in the US. I spoke to the editor of Bon Appetit. She was saying how food actually is important in a campaign as well. So yeah, food magazines are incredible. And of course, I'm a reader of them as well.
Well, food podcasts tend to span and run the gamut of all of those topics too, I've got to say. No, but you have a point. I think that there is such a variety in the offer on a newsstand. And I love that it looks like today you've brought us a bit of a selection from the more, I suppose, mainstream to the niche and indie. Perhaps you can give me a bit of an idea of what's your earliest memory of like a food magazine, or what's your emotional connection and nostalgic connection to this type of publishing?
You know, my first connection, perhaps it was not like a food magazine per se, but in Brazil we had a lot of kind of women's weekly magazines. And as a magazine fan, I used to read them. And there were a lot of stories about food, including recipes. And I think for me, recipes, I know is very traditional. You know, I know a lot of food magazines, they try to be cool. Let's do a story about this, but we have no recipes. But I think they're so important. And I remember I used to rip the pages of the magazine. Sorry, I don't do this with all the magazines.
But sometimes it's called for, I think.
Sometimes it's called for it. And I used to give to my grandmas. And I still do it, but this time I give to my partner. So this tradition remains. So I think that was my earliest memory when it comes to food and print together.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question. How usable do you think a food magazine should be? Because you alluded to that. I think recipes are an important part of it, but increasingly, and we know this from speaking to chefs, from speaking to producers in this studio as well, people are really attracted to stories. So they don't just want to have a straight up recipe anymore, but they need to know the background. They want to know the background. And also people are so much more attuned as to where dishes come from and the need to honor that tradition, that specificity. So how much room is there for all of that narrative around the proper kind of practical information and nuts and bolts of it?
There's space for both. And one title that comes to mind is Lindsay Journal, where it's a beautiful encyclopedic, very large magazine. They choose one ingredient, every issue. I think last time was apple. And the editor, she's amazing. And of course, perhaps there are not many recipes in the magazine, but she did organize a few dinners for some of the subscribers or people that are interested in Lindsay Journal. So, she's managing to combine food, practical food, like making dinner to people, and also kind of representing the latest ingredient of the magazine. But yes, we're talking here about mainstream titles. I think there's still a space for them as well. We'll talk about our favorite niche ones, but for example, Australian Gourmet Traveler. This is amazing magazine. I came across when I went to Australia last year, so I'm a little bit late on it because it's been going on for a few years. I just think they do such a decent job. There's recipes, there's beautiful travel pages. It's not perhaps the coolest magazine in the world, but even this beautiful cover, this is an edition, I believe, from last November, so it's been a few months, but it's kind of gin-cured salmon, but it creates so much desire in the cover. The yellow, I think it's very attractive. Food is attractive,
Well, this is what I was going to say. I think that looking to the food press, and I suppose the way that we take pictures of food gives you so much of an indication of the way that we think about what's appealing nowadays. And I think it's interesting that in a world where if you look at lots of restaurants and Instagrams, we're moving more into a sort of slapdashy type of way of food photography. These magazines still make a huge amount of effort to create a spread that feels very styled, that feels like, definitely a food stylist was on set for that shoot and there was a huge amount of effort to angle the plate just right. What do you think in terms of the aesthetics of the food photography that you've seen on the covers and on the pages of these magazines over the years? How has that evolved as well?
Well, you're right. I mean, with social media on TikTok, you have this kind of slapdash, people like eating oozy sandwiches. I have to say I'm not the biggest fan of that. I quite like a little bit more of a traditional cover, like you can see here on Gourmet Traveler, or even this one from the US, Food and Wine, which is similar to Bon Appetit as well. So there is still, and I mean, this Food and Wine cover is a Thanksgiving edition, is right in front of us. This could have been a magazine in the 70s, I feel. It's super traditional, having a pumpkin cream cheese pie on the cover with kind of a cheesecake with tequila. Well, maybe this one with tequila is quite...
Although 70s desserts were quite boozy, let's be honest.
Exactly.
So it is a bit retro.
But there is space for creativity, of course. I think the niche titles actually influence the mainstream ones as well, undeniably so. We have beautiful ones like the Gourmand, which officially doesn't really exist anymore. I think they publish books still. Who knows, it might come back. I was talking to David Lane the other day, so he didn't promise anything, but that was very influential for mainstream magazines. And for example, one that I came across recently, Morgenmete, it's a magazine dedicated to breakfast.
That is incredible.
That's issue 2, by the way. So it's lasting.
How many do you think the team can get out of the door before all of the breakfasts sort of have exhausted?
And they're big magazines, so there are a lot of stories. For example, this one, To All the Beans I Have Loved Before. So for those who like to eat beans in the morning, I don't, but I'm very interested to read about it,
So let's take a look at Morgenmete. What do you think is the perfect kind of food feature? Do you think that you want to see something that goes really granular on the ingredients, like some of the features here with like beautiful photography of like specific dishes do? Do you want to see sweeping travelogues and connections with like cultural histories? Or where do you think the perfect food feature lies?
I think there's a story in Morgenmete more at the beginning, which is kind of an opinion piece about growing up with savory breakfast. And I think it's fascinating because, yes, I'm very curious in Monaco. If you're from Italy, Japan, we eat differently, and it's fascinating. And I think especially breakfast, I think every country, you're so attached to what you eat in the morning. So I think I like kind of the personal pieces. And you mentioned travelogue as well. Chiara, today we travel for food, literally. You might go to a city because you've booked a restaurant that you wanted to visit, and we see that more and more. I didn't mention here, we have titles, very successful ones like Fare, where, for example, they do an issue in Lisbon. So it's a little bit of a travel guide. They might recommend a hotel or two, but they also they focus on food. And I think that's very, very important. Even titles like Condé Nast Traveler, for example, sure, they talk about hotels and, expeditions or whatever you want. But I think food is like almost 40% of all their content, just so you know how important they are. And although not strictly food magazines, we have Garden and Gun, for example, which is a beautiful title celebrating the American South. Food, again, one of the main things, is usually on the cover, how to make beautiful food from the South. So, food is everywhere. Thank you very much, Chiara. And for more on food publishing, make sure to tune in to this week's episode of The Menu, featuring other amazing food publications. And talking about food publications, one title caught my eye recently, Morgenmete, a beautiful magazine which is all about breakfast. The title is a thing of beauty and expands the topic in beautiful ways. I know how in the office, to talk about breakfast around the world is one of our favorite topics. I spoke with Tim Lampe, the editor-in-chief of the Atlanta-based title.
The etymology, when I looked it up, I think is actually an old English word for the original English word for morning meal from the 14th century. A little bit of the background when I had first started, I think the magazine, when I first started it, was trying to be somewhat of not a parody, but making fun of like curated culture mags, like Kinfolk and things like that. And so at the time it was about finding maybe the most pretentious sounding name. So initially on purpose, it was like that, but I think I've come to embrace it since then as being like this old word meaning morning meal that turned into breakfast later on.
Fantastic. And breakfast is such an interesting thing, Tim, because I feel even in the office, because we have people from, different countries, it's always such a heated topic of discussion saying, well, I want kind of a savory breakfast or I want a piece of cake. It's a very interesting, so funny that one meal can lead to so many interesting conversations, right?
Definitely, yeah. And when I first started exploring it, I was thinking maybe there wasn't enough here. Honestly, I was like, would people care enough about just breakfast? And I think I have so many friends that I talk to about their traditions around breakfast. Like one example of that is French toast is one of my favorite dishes, but everybody has a different family tradition or a family recipe, the way they grew up having it, the way the parents did it. I had a friend who said they put sour cream on the French toast, and that was like, wow, that's weird to me. And so even just like these small dishes have so much history, tradition around them that I just thought there was so much here that people could really relate to.
Well, before we talk more about the magazine. What do you have for breakfast? What is your kind of breakfast of choice?
Every single day I get up and I make my wife and I scrambled eggs. We do like a chicken sausage or a turkey. We have like a sourdough slice and coffee, like cold brew. So I love to get up and I love making breakfast. So that's what we usually go through. The scrambled eggs is like a spinach, cheese situation. So nothing fancy.
I could relate to one of the pieces in the new issue, which is about the Italian breakfast, because I'm from Brazil and we tend to have a bit of a sweet tooth in the morning. And it's funny, when I came to the UK, that's actually, people thought it was quite strange and almost exotic in a way. But I think that's what I saw about Morgenmete. It's quite, there's a lot of kind of personal stories, short stories. I think it's a very surprising magazine for some when you say it's about breakfast. But it's really interesting. There's good literature in there. It's really, really interesting. I wonder if you can talk about what people can expect in a magazine like this.
Yeah, for me, breakfast is always the starting point. So I think something like Italian breakfast, for example, an old coworker going to Italy and she was like, I'm going to try, I'm going to talk about my breakfasts, but it goes other places. And so I think for me, it's always that the starting place is the breakfast table, but where it goes is up to the writer. And that doesn't leave the boundaries completely off limits. But I really find that that's like the heart of where the story starts, but where it goes is something very personal. So I think when you're reading these stories, that hook that is coming in is like relating to something at the breakfast table, but where the author chooses to take the story is something that is entirely surprising and I think a fun ride for everybody who's reading.
Well, let's talk about the cover for issue 2. It's beautiful. I love the logo for Morgenmete. It's so kind of fun, and the colors, even the texture of the paper in the cover. So tell us, because of course you have a lot of experience, especially with design, right? I think that was your first kind of talent in a way.
Yeah. I'm a creative director by day. So design is really important to me. And I love the physical feel of print magazines. So the logo, for example, I worked with this type artist, Tina Smith, based in New York. She's wonderful, has done an incredible logo marks for companies. My pitch to her was a logo that was syrupy, like really syrupy type. And so you can see that in the logo itself. It feels like kind of syrup thrown on a piece of paper. So it was fun and expressive. And I really love that. On the print quality, I worked with Park Communications in London, and they're a really great partner in which they'll send some paper types. They can really explore paper stock, how you want things to go. So, a lot of Mac developers will put in different paper stock throughout there. So I knew I wanted to have like the photo essays on a smooth stock paper, and then some of the other on like a nice little textured. And the cover stock is like the stipple texture. And I've explored a couple different stipple textures, and this one has been my favorite so far because it has this nice matte finish to it. But it's not so glossy that when you go to take a photo of it, you can't really see what it is. I think sometimes you make a magazine that's so glossy that photographing it becomes a little tough.
And you mentioned at the beginning that, there's a sense of humor to it as well. And I think that's what I loved about it. It's definitely not po-faced. Because right at the end, one of my favorite parts, what their egg preparation says about your relationship status. I think everyone should read it. All I can say is that sunny side up, I think I'm fine. I think I'm fine for now. That's my favorite. But you like that, this kind of addition of humor. It's kind of a little bit of a parody, but I think it's quite fun to read.
Yeah, the first issue, which maybe ends up being more of a prototype at the time, was a lot of humorous writing. So I wrote a good bit of it to try and get the tone and voice out, but invited other folks to write along with it. And this issue, when it started to develop, I had that idea of breakfast as a starting place. And so where people took it early on really set the editorial tone. But I wanted to make sure I never got rid of the humor or that kind of fun and surprising feel that like you could be reading something and you could laugh and you can feel something. But ultimately, like at the end there, I still wanted to wrap it up with some just straight humor. And that's always really fun as a palate cleanser.
And this is a very international magazine. I know you're based in Atlanta. That's where the magazine is published, but it's printed here in London, right? So I think your whole idea was already to, it's an international magazine. Yeah,
it is. And folks, like my editor is based in London, the printer is based in London, but we've had folks contribute from across the world. And, as we're about to put the call for pitches for issue 3, there's already been a lot of people who have found it across the world who want to pitch it with their stories from their country and things like that. So I think it's nice to get that international feel out there. And this time around, we worked with a distributor, Ron Ollie, and they're also able to get it more places across the world, which has been really incredible. So I'm just overjoyed to see it resonating with people, because there's certainly a very specific idea of American breakfast. And I always want to like try and get around that. Like when people think American breakfast, they're like, oh, you guys just eat sweets like pancakes with whipped cream. And I think I always want to dispel that notion that American breakfast has to be this like a very big thing, I guess.
I always think of cereal when I think of the US and as well. And there is a piece actually about cereal in the new issue, right?
Yeah, there is. Cereal, yeah, I don't know if that's a very American thing, but it definitely is something that you grow up eating a lot of cereal, and you think it's healthy because it has grains and protein and stuff, but mostly straight sugar.
And I want to talk to you. It's interesting, Tim. I see, doing the stack. There's been a little bit of a boom in food publishing as well, and very different magazines. Like yours, for example, which is kind of dedicated to breakfast, and there are other, for example, Fare, which looks at a different city and their cuisine. How do you feel? Do you consume this other kind of food magazines as well? It feels like an exciting place to be, if you're publishing a food magazine at the moment.
I do, yeah. And one of my favorites it's a defunct magazine, Lucky Peach, which was based in the US. And when I first started my magazine, selfishly, I really wanted to work for Lucky Peach. So it became like not a portfolio piece, but like maybe they'll see this. And by the time that first issue came out, Lucky Peach had gone away. But food magazines in the US owe so much to that magazine on the way that they look and they feel. Big magazines here like Bon Appetit and Saviar and others have adopted a lot of the design language and some of that sensibility of that. So I'd like to think Lucky Peach really set the tone of the last 10 years of food magazines. There are a lot of food magazines that I read, and I love to hear from perspectives of the chefs. I know I consume so many food magazines. I really love each particular slant. So, when continuing to work on Morgenmete, I always want for us to cut out our little slice of breakfast and what it means to people. So hopefully no one ever thinks we're coming into their territory, but we'll always adopt, if chefs want to write for it, amateur food people want to write for it. I think it's something that can involve everybody.
I love that you mentioned Lucky Peach. I remember it was excellent. And what's the plan now? Do you want to make it this kind of a biannual title for the next issues, or how do you think Morgenmete will evolve for the next issues?
I'm going to continue to work on the different themes. So like for this next one, we're working on a theme around nostalgia, which is very big for breakfast. I mean, so much of what people think about breakfast is nostalgic for how they grew up with it or family traditions. So there's a lot there. I think I would try to do 2 issues a year, but realistically with a small team, it's probably will become an annual thing, which is all right. A lot goes into it. I think for the quality that I want to put out there, it is hard to get it out there biannual in a way that I would feel really excited about what was going out. So as a designer and a creative, I always have like a very high bar for what goes out. And I would prefer to put all of that into an annual release rather than trying to get out a few of them bi-monthly. We have some events and stuff lined up, and we'll want to do a big launch party for the next one. So I think some of the future of what we're doing, I think with the media group, is more events and community building type stuff. So I want to be able to launch things around Morgenmete and not just the print magazine.
It's fantastic. And finally, Tina, I just want to go back to one of my first questions is, I think you can tell a lot about someone by their breakfast habits, because some people like to have it very quietly with no one around, no sound. Others, they prefer a more convivial one. Some people are even, meeting up in the weekend for breakfast. I mean, I'm not even mentioning brunch. But I think there's something quite interesting about human behavior and breakfast, right?
I think so, yeah. And it's not a judgment call, but I always think people who are proud that they don't eat breakfast, or there's like a lot of people who will be like, I don't eat anything until 11 a.m. or I don't touch anything till lunch. And it always feels like you're missing out on so much. Like you're proud to say, I don't engage in breakfast, but it is something that to me sets the tone for the day so strongly. I wake up and I choose to spend that 20 minutes making breakfast for my family. And that's really important to me as a tradition. I know for a lot of people, that is also important. So to say that you don't have time for it, some people don't grab something on the go. There's like a lot of really great on the go options. You can stop. I think for me, the ritual of stopping to get coffee or the ritual to stop to do something for breakfast says that I'm going to set intentionality for the day. And I think for a lot of people, that's what they want to do, is how are they setting up their day to be successful.
Thank you very much, Tim. And the second issue of Morgenmete is out now. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks to our editor, Jack Dewars. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always listen again at monocle.com or subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.